Hello, welcome to Special Places for Species, the second in our series of webinars about bird migration and the birds that we see in the UK that may have made epic journeys to get to and from here. I'm Jamie, I work on the RSPB magazine. Now, before we start, a few little bits of Zoom housekeeping for you. As this is a Zoom webinar, you won't be able to turn on your video or microphone, but you will be able to ask us questions using the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. So we've got some time allocated for questions and answers at the end of the session, but if we don't get to them all, we'll do our best to answer them afterwards and get in touch with you afterwards. The session is being recorded. We hope to get the recording up onto our YouTube channel in about a week's time. There's no chat function enabled for this event. If you have any technical issues, there is someone from the events team with us today who may be able to help, but for some specific Zoom related issues, we may not be able to offer any support. Now, the UK sits at a key location in the global flyway, a superhighway for birds which stretches all the way down from the Arctic down to the tip of South Africa. This is known as the East Atlantic Flyway. Because of where we are, we're joined by migratory species right across the year as they make their huge journeys. In autumn and winter, we're joined by birds that have spent the summer further north and east as they seek out our milder climate. And in spring and summer, we're joined by birds that spend our winter months further south in milder climates. Familiar favourites like swifts and cuckoos are just some of these spring arrivals. Now, I'm going to be joined by Jos Ashpole, who's going to talk us through some of the species we might see and where we might see them. And I find this fascinating because I saw a few this morning. I'll talk about those in a moment, but it's quite exciting that right now those species are arriving with us. So let's see if we can get Jos over to talk us through where we can see these birds. Hello, Jos.
Hi, Jamie.
Hello, how you doing?
Yep, good, thank you. Thanks for
Now,
inviting
Jos
me.
has come to discuss the species that joins for summer. Before we get started, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Jamie. So I work in the RSPB's Global Species Recovery team, and our team is focused on improving the fortunes of a suite of species that are under threat, both here in the UK and internationally, and of course that includes migratory species.
That is an excellent and very exciting job because it's a whole suite of birds and some of the most exciting birds, I think. Where can you see migratory species?
Well, they're pretty much everywhere. Migratory birds use a wide range of habitats in the UK, from the remotest of mountains to our coasts and beaches, farmland, and bustling cities. They're everywhere.
They really, really are. Can you give us some examples of the birds that we live alongside that might be making these big journeys?
We live alongside familiar favourites like the swift. I'm looking out for ones now. I haven't seen any yet, but hopefully we'll see them soon. And one of my favourites, the house martin. So, like swifts, house martins live alongside us. They create little nest cups on the sides of buildings high up, out of mud and little bits of twigs. And they have these wonderful chattering calls that are really evocative of summer, and I just love them.
And I have to say, quick update. I saw my first house martins of the year this morning as I was taking my son to
Ah,
school. We had
amazing.
two swoop over and couldn't hear the chattering that they have that delightful little noise, but they were already nest building because I could see them swooping up into the apexes of houses. So exciting times. So do look out for those. Now, moving on from our towns and cities where most of us are these days, where else can we find migratory birds?
Well, let's head to the uplands. So let's go to our moors and mountains. And these are home to species including wheatears and whinchats, ringoozles that look a bit similar to the blackbirds that you might see in your garden, but they've got a little white bib on the front. And if you go high enough in the mountains of Scotland, you might find dotterel, which is a little wading bird in the plover family, which, like the ringoozle, winters in southern Europe and North Africa.
And how about the lowlands, heathland, for example?
Well, we're joined here by a little friend. So if you head out to a lowland heathland at dusk, you might hear it. And it's the nightjar. These birds are really secretive, and during the daytime they sit tight, and you can see they're incredibly well camouflaged against that heathland vegetation. But at dusk and dawn, they make this incredible churring noise, and it's just so ethereal.
But it's an extraordinary alien sort of noise. Now, we can't talk about migratory birds without mentioning the cuckoo. What sort of habitats do they need?
Yeah, so the call of the cuckoo is such an evocative sound of spring and summer, isn't it? So a really good place to listen for them is reed beds, scrub and grassland, and again the uplands. They lay their nests in the eggs of dunnocks, reed warblers, and meadow pipits. So yeah, get out and look for them because they're not here for very long. The adults will start to head back to Africa in June, which is just incredible. They're here for such a short amount of time. So I'll certainly be going to listen for them.
And incredible that those juvenile cuckoos that grow up with a different type of bird, parents have gone, the adult cuckoos have gone, those juvenile cuckoos somehow, maybe we'll come to this in the questions afterwards, somehow know where to go. Somehow they know where to migrate. I find that just extraordinary.
Yeah.
So from the uplands to the lowlands, we've discussed some well-known migratory species, but now we're going to really focus in on three key habitats. And they're the habitats that we asked you about in that quick poll at the beginning there. Interesting to see that 47% of you, nearly half of you, don't have a preference of habitat. You love them all, hopefully. You love the wetlands and woodlands and things. But I'll let Jos introduce the three areas we're going to look at today.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so as I said, migratory birds are across a huge range of habitats, and we could spend hours talking about them. But today we've chosen to focus on just three, and they're really three special habitats that the RSPB is working to protect. So we're going to look at our seabird islands, our wetlands, and our rainforests.
Let's take a look at those seabird islands. Well, that was absolutely wonderful. Just such a joy to see, and something that you can see around many of our coasts in early summer. I'm going to be joined now by Paul St Pierre to talk a little bit about these habitats. So while we wait for Paul to come through, I'm just planning in my head where I want to visit this year. And my top tip is one of our top kind of seabird colonies. One of my favourites is Bempton Cliffs, but I'm sure Paul's got his favourites as well. Paul, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your role, please?
Hi Jamie, hi everyone. So I'm Paul St Pierre and I'm a conservation officer for the RSPB and I lead on our seascape here in the West Country. So my patch covers anything from Lundy right up in the Bristol Channel, all around to the Scillies and then around the south coast as far as the South Devon coast and across the Channel Islands. So not a lot of land, but a huge area of sea.
People don't always think of our seabirds as being migratory, but they do travel huge distances to breed on our shores, don't they?
Yeah, they do. I mean, they're amazing ocean wanderers, and some of them sort of top the league tables in terms of distances travelled. So, for example, the Arctic tern will travel from the Arctic Circle to the Antarctic Circle every year. That's 30,000 miles. That's incredible journeys they will make. So, and that's just one example of many species that do some amazing journeys.
I've heard it said that some Arctic terns probably see more daylight than any other species on Earth as a result of that, which is just it's one of those kind of mind-blowing facts, isn't it? About yeah, quite a special looking bird as well. It's sort of a sea swallow.
That's,
Now,
yeah,
sorry, go.
yeah. I mean, these birds are highly adapted to, and clearly the terns are adapted to long distance journeys. So if you just look at the way they're built, yeah, incredible. And they can live at sea for long periods of time, which is another incredible thing to think about, really.
Let's go back to Lundy. So can you describe Lundy? What's it like, and where is it?
Yeah, so Lundy sits off the North Devon coast. It's probably about an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes out of Ilfracombe or Bideford if you want to take the ferry. So it's about 15 miles off the coast. It's a pretty wild and rugged place. I always think of it as a bit like a Scottish island that's been towed into these bucolic waters of the southwest. But yeah, it's about 500 hectares. It's flat topped, but it's got these amazing steep slopes and cliff granite buttresses, which yeah, really, really impressive. It's owned by the National Trust, managed by the Landmark Trust, and you can stay in a very small village at top of Milcombe. Has its own watering hole called the Tavern, which a lot of people frequent on their visits there. But yeah, amazing place to see seabirds.
Sounds like a top place for a holiday. Now, what kind of migratory bird species call Lundy home during the year?
Yeah, so Lundy is a place that attracts both land and seabirds. We get very similar birds to what you might see where you live. So things like swallows come to breed every year. Species like whitethroat, which is a regular sort of bird in farmland, and linnets again come in the summer. And in the winter, you'll get a range of birds that we might see like fieldfares and redwings and things like snipe. Actually, spend a lot of, you get quite a lot of snipe on the tops in those wild and more moorland type habitats on the top of Lundy. But I think the main sort of migratory species that really make Lundy special are the seabirds. So yeah, we get a lot of seabirds, about 11 species, and many of those are migratory and come to breed every year from different places.
And including these lovely puffins that we can see on the screen right now.
That's it. Well, interestingly, Lundy is Norse for puffin. So you can imagine that this was probably a pretty important place for the people who wandered the seas. As a food resource, there's nothing else. They'll probably come here. And you can imagine the colonies of puffins and probably other seabirds being huge and really attractive to these people.
It's truly amazing that culturally, a lot of our place names around the UK do come from animals and birds. And obviously, yeah, Lundy is one of them. So it sounds like a top place to visit. Now, I understand there has been some good news from Lundy recently. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so we've got an amazing partnership with the organisations on there. And if you look at the history of seabirds on Lundy, there used to be about 80,000 seabirds on there around the time of the Second World War. But these populations declined, and by about 2000 they were down to about 6,000 birds, which is, if you actually visited the colonies, they look sick, they look poorly. I mean, people are really worried about some of the species. Things like puffin were down to the last 5 birds. I mean, they were going to lose an iconic bird for the island. So the partnership got together and they did some amazing conservation work. And our last survey in 2023, we had over 40,000 seabirds now using Lundy as home, which is amazing.
True conservation success. Now, we've got a question for you from Rachel. Now, we've mentioned the puffins. What are the other seabirds that you might see on Lundy?
Yeah, so I think there's 11 species. So we've got 4 species of gull. So we've got the 3 large gulls, which are the greater black-backed, lesser black-backed herring gull. And we've got the kittiwake, which is doing very well compared to a lot of mainland colonies. And then we've got what's probably the commonest seabird now on Lundy is a Manx shearwater. So over 20,000 of those 40,000 seabirds are Manx shearwater. And then we've got this amazing new species of seabird, which is colonised since all the conservation work we've been doing, which is the storm petrel. So it increased, only first colonised in about 2014. And then we've got these lovely auks. We've got razorbills, guillemots, and the puffin, of course, and shag and fulmar. So that's the 11 species. So yeah.
I'd just like to ask about the shearwaters and the storm petrels, if I can. So, am I right in thinking that these are nocturnal species, aren't they? So you're not going to see them if you go during a day trip. What might you hear them, or is there another way you can encounter them?
Yeah, so if you want to see Manx shearwater or storm petrel, it's actually quite difficult to see them on the island. You could walk up to their colony and overlook it and think that it's actually just empty. There's nothing there. It's actually a place in the daytime where you wouldn't even notice they were there. So it's really at night when it comes alive. And yeah, so the best time to see the birds are usually on the boat trip across or in the evenings. And if you're sitting on the slopes, you may well see the birds congregating on the sea before they come to land. They're highly vulnerable to predation on land. And obviously that's why they visit at night, so they avoid some of the predators they face.
Absolutely fascinating. Now we're getting a few questions coming in. Please do keep sending your questions in using the Q&A box, and we're going to gather them together and we'll answer them towards the end of this session. Thank you so much, Paul. We're going to have another look at a different habitat now. So Paul will come back in at the end if we have some more questions for him. But we're going to take a look now at our native woodlands. So I think we've got a quick film to show you on this one. That was a joy to see. I'm going to welcome my next guest to the stage now, Jon Cryer, to talk a little bit about Atlantic oak woodlands. Hello, Jon.
Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Jon. Can you tell us a bit about what you do? What's your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a site manager for the what are termed as the Mid Wales woodland sites. So this is a suite of reserves that runs from Cwm Clydach near Swansea in South Wales, right up to the Mawddach estuary on the southern edge of Eryri National Park. So quite a diverse group of sites. They're termed the woodland sites, but it's actually a mix of habitat. So we have some uplands, some upland hay meadows, a lot of freeth, as we would call it in Wales, which is kind of that in between the uplands and the lowlands habitat. So yeah, really nice varied group of sites, and a small team that I work with.
What's it like being in an Atlantic oak woodland?
So I guess there's a couple of really distinct things. So it's cool. Temperatures are pretty stable throughout the year, so they don't get hot in the summer particularly, although that is changing slightly. So kind of 15, 16 degrees year round. And they are, as you'd imagine, in parts of Wales, they're pretty wet. So the Atlantic woodlands get roughly around somewhere in the region of 200 days of rain a year. So that's not necessarily big kind of downpours, but just a small amount of rain. So they tend to be very kind of damp, humid. You'll always hear water somewhere when you're in the woodlands. And then the other kind of key feature really that is hugely obvious is the amount of plants. So the entire landscape is generally carpeted in mosses, and even the trees up to kind of shoulder height can be just a carpet of moss and lichens as well. So yeah, cool and damp, very, very green.
Now, to me, that sounds like bliss. Just kind of really calming kind of space where you just go wander and just be calm and relax. But it's also a vital habitat for nature, isn't it? Why is this habitat so important?
Well, it's incredibly rare. So temperate rainforest is actually rarer than tropical rainforest that we generally know is threatened and in need of help. So temperate rainforest covers only about 1% of the Earth's surface. So it is a very rare habitat. And we're kind of lucky in the UK in that we get, particularly along the western edge of the UK, we get a lot of the right conditions for the rainforest. So those kind of, yeah, as I say, cool, wet conditions. And it produces a habitat that supports a really diverse mix of species. So somewhere in the region of, some of the best sites will have 200 or more species of mosses and bryophytes, 200 more species of lichens, plus then all the woodland fungi, the other kind of native flora, plus then we've got the birds and animals as well. So yeah, really incredibly diverse habitat.
Just to reflect on some of what we've heard so far in these webinars, it's fascinating that not only is the UK special because of where we are, but because of those extraordinary habitats, those little pockets of habitats. Did you say that was less than 1% of the Earth's surface? Is those?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an incredibly rare habitat. Yep.
Wow. So what are we doing? What's the RSPB doing to help protect these sites, particularly in Wales?
In Wales. So there's quite a lot going on, actually. So the last few years we've been working as part of a collaboration under the Celtic Rainforest Life Project, and we're trying to address some of the key issues. And there are some really fundamental issues that are the same, as Wales, Scotland, southern England as well. So things like rhododendron ponticum and other invasive species are pretty devastating to the habitat. So they create a really dense shade that stops the lichens and bryophytes from thriving, and also prevents any growth of kind of ground flora. So rhododendron, huge issue that we're trying to address. And we've also then, the habitat's quite fragmented. The remaining bits of habitat are generally those kind of steep gorges along the west coast that haven't been improved for agriculture or managed particularly over the years. So they're really kind of fragmented habitat. So linking and joining woodlands together. And also then some of the fragments have been covered with plantation forestry. So we've got these kind of ancient remnant features and remnant trees within big conifer plantations. So we're trying to restore some of those as well. And then a key factor is getting the grazing right in these sites. So historically they would have been grazed by native herbivores, but more recently that's kind of stopped. So what we're trying to do now is introduce appropriate levels of grazing with generally livestock are a really good kind of option. So lots of Highland cattle, Dexters, which are quite nice little small cows that suit a woodland, and they'll get in, they'll break the habitat up, they'll create niches and space for other habitat, other plants and things to come through. So we also and across the UK actually, there's lots of, I mentioned collaboration. So there's alliances getting together now where we're kind of recognising how important the habitat is. So there's an alliance for Wales Rainforest. There's the Scottish Rainforest Alliance, where we're working in collaboration with landowners and other conservation organisations to try and protect the remaining fragments of habitat. And then, as I mentioned, kind of link together habitat, buffer habitats, and just generally improve the condition. And then on one of my sites, I'm really lucky. I've got a really kind of proactive, active volunteer group called Fledgemore. So we've got a pied flycatcher on the screen there. So Fledgemore monitor nest boxes at Gwenfrwd Dinas, which is a reserve in Carmarthenshire. Pied flycatchers really like a nest box. So there's about 600 nest boxes on the reserve. And Fledgemore put in thousands of hours now across the spring, monitoring the nest boxes, ringing adults, ringing young, and just giving us a really good picture of how the pied flycatchers are doing there. So
I love pied flycatchers, and we had a question from Catherine actually, which was, what were the birds shown in the forest film? And I think that was pied flycatcher, wasn't it? There certainly was.
Yeah, they'd spotted flycatcher in there as well somewhere. But I guess the three, particularly in Wales, there's kind of a trio of woodland species. So the pied flycatcher, the wood warbler, and the red start are kind of classic Western Atlantic oak woodland species. I mentioned that it's a variety of habitat. So we've got the kind of woodland edge as well. So we're lucky enough to get cuckoo and then tree pipits and windchats and things as well on the free habitat. So my sites were quite lucky. We get those short distance migrants as well. So we get the harriers and the merlins and things that come up from the coast to breed in the spring and the summer. So yeah, really migrant species are really kind of key to my reserves.
It sounds like I'm just sort of whet my appetite to come and visit again. I was just reading. I've just picked up my RSPB magazine actually because there's a story about flycatchers breaking reserve records, and they're doing well apparently at Haweswater, also Coombs Valley, Consell Woods. So yeah, it sounds like this habitat management is paying off across our sites, isn't it? It's really kind of working.
It is for sure, yeah, and getting that grazing right is kind of key to that. We're opening the woodlands that were maybe slightly neglected for a while, starting to open them back up, create those light, airy conditions that are good for plants that then produce the insect that the birds will be feeding on. So yeah, we know what needs to be done, and we're implementing it now. So we're really lucky in kind of Wales as well. We've had over the last couple of years pine marten, not necessarily reintroduction, but a reinforcement. So there were a few around, and had some lovely footage a few days ago from somebody on the reserve of a pine marten den site as well. So yeah, really, really lovely sites.
Is this a good time of year to come and visit to see a lot of these species that we're talking about?
It's the best time and the best place to be at this time of year, I think.
Yeah.
They're just about looking at their best. You know, everything is coming into leaf. The migrant birds are back, so the woodlands are full of song. The bluebells are out. They are pretty stunning over the next kind of month or so. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jon. There's one to add to your list of places to visit now or soon. As soon as you can, get over there and see and experience those wonderful woodlands. Thank you, Jon. We'll bring you back in at the end. And also, if you've got any questions for Jon or for any of us, really just pop them in the Q&A box and we'll respond to you a little bit later on. We're going to move to our third habitat now, which is coastal wetlands, fabulous coastal wetlands. So let's take a quick look at a video that we've got for you to show you what those places look like. I love watching birds on coastal wetlands. I think partly because they're often quite flat spaces, so you can see quite a long way, but also there's that excitement of things arriving off the coast and the sheer variety as well. But I'm not going to spoil what our next speaker is going to say because we're going to dive into them now and find out a little bit more. Milo Sumner, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your role, please?
Absolutely. So I am the program manager for the RSPB East Coast Wetlands program. And simply put, that's a banner term that encompasses all of the work that the RSPB is doing on the east coast of England, broadly defined in this case for the low-lying wetlands between the Humber estuary to the north and the Thames estuary to the south. So all of our work within that area to protect and in some cases restore fragile coastal habitats, especially habitats that support the millions of birds that visit our shores on a seasonal basis during migration.
What makes wetlands, coastal wetlands, so important for migratory species? And what sort of species visit and when? So it's a lot of questions at once, but what's important here? What's the importance of this kind of place?
Well, how long have you got, really? I think, you know, we've touched on, you know, the theme here is migration. And if we think about migratory highways, flyways as literal motorways in the sky for birds as they go, you know, from the top of the planet to the bottom, you know, huge distances, wetlands are those service stations. Wetlands are places where birds are going to need to stop to rest and to feed, and in some cases, breed. In our wetlands in the UK, the richness and the density of food sources is, you know, pretty unparalleled, whether that's the invertebrates or the plant matter. So for birds that are traveling thousands of miles, it's crucial that they have places to stop and refuel really quickly, but at the same time also places where they can rest. Wetlands tend to be quite safe in terms of safe from flooding or storm weather. That's kind of the function that they serve within the habitat map, but also from predators, in particular from humans. They tend to be quite free of human impact. So especially if you're birds that are looking for safe spaces to breed, you've got good vegetation cover from general predators, but also fairly little human presence. Now, can I tell you a little bit about things you might see on wetlands?
I'd love to know. I don't know what those are on the screen for a start. Are those, is that knots or something like that?
Those are knots indeed, which are one of the many things that you might see. And it really depends on what time of year you're going to be coming to wetlands on the coast of England. Now, a slight disclaimer, I'm going to talk about resident populations and migratory populations. And for many species in the UK, you might have subpopulations that do kind of like to stick around where the majority might leave for the spring or leave in the autumn. So, please bear with me with that disclaimer. On the East Coast in spring, so one of the first things you're going to start seeing is the return of birds as everything starts to warm up. Terns and gulls are going to return to coastal areas. You'll see some raptors coming to the slightly more inland wetlands, so hobbies over marshes or wet woodlands, hunting for dragonflies. If you're lucky, you might see ospreys fishing in deeper waters. And then waders arriving to breed, like the little ring plover, and of course, the iconic RSPB logo bird, also known as the avocet. Then you have your fantastic summer. These birds are sticking around, they're breeding. Come autumn, you have the change of the guards. A lot of these birds that have been breeding in the UK will head south again as things starts to get cooler. And you'll have waders arriving in the UK who are our winter populations. They'll have been breeding in the high Arctic, and they'll be arriving in huge numbers with geese, pink-footed geese and brent geese. And some of those waders you might expect to see over the winter in the UK might be not, as you see here. I think this is from Snettisham, and bar-tailed godwits. And then, not specific to wetlands, but we do get fantastic sightings of the murmurations over our wetlands in England are, of course, starlings arriving. And just one more point I'd say is that while lots of things are coming and going in the spring and the autumn, many birds are passing through. They're going on long journeys, like the Arctic tern, for example, from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. And they'll stop over, making use of our wetlands, those service stations, to refuel and to rest up before carrying on. Some examples of that might be Wimbrel, green sandpiper, or if you're really lucky, the black tern.
Yeah, I'd love to see a black tern.
Yeah.
Have I ever seen one? I don't think I have actually.
I haven't.
Snettisham. So you mentioned Snettisham, and that's quite a key place.
Yeah.
And that's on the Norfolk coast. Can you tell us a little bit about what your team and the RSPB are doing to protect England's East Coast wetlands and help those migratory birds?
Absolutely. Please stop me if I keep talking. I'm quite passionate about what I do, and I do tend to ramble sometimes. So I think it's important to recognize what are the threats that we're dealing with before we start talking about what the work is. And the East Coast nature is in crisis, as we know, and there are multiple threats that we might discuss, but I'll briefly touch on two that the East Coast wetlands really focuses on, and those are to do with climate change. Coastal habitats are inherently fragile and vulnerable, and especially in the East Coast of England, they are under threat from sea level rise and a phenomenon called coastal squeeze, where their habitats are literally squeezed by the rising sea level against hard flood defenses and slowly disappear. And then increased erosion from extreme weather and frequency of storms, which is also a climate change phenomenon. So those are the main things that we often focus on in the program. And the work that we're doing to combat this is all about improving the fundamental resilience of our habitats and the space for them to adapt as these threats face them. So coastal adaptation is the name of the game within the East Coast Wetlands Programme. We look for areas on the East Coast where we can make those hard flood defences more porous. Of course, we're always bearing in mind communities, people and property, and being responsible and appropriate where we try to do this work. So we've carried out 23 projects called managed realignments on the East Coast of England so far within the programme area. And that is effectively where you, under very managed conditions, create a hole in a flood defence. You've built subsequent defences inland, and you allow your salt marsh or perhaps your reed bed or other intertidal habitats to retreat with the rising sea levels into that new area, thus reducing the coastal squeeze and basically giving an outlet for the habitat to move back into. There are less profound ways of doing this, where you allow some seawater in through controlled conditions, and that's called regulated tidal exchange. If you want to know more about that, you can look it up or ask a question. And we also work a lot with partners. So we're the RSPB, we can't do this kind of landscape scale thing on our own. So across the East Coast, we're working with other NGOs, that's Wildlife Trust, National Trust, Wildfowl and Wetland Trust, the various local authorities, the statutory bodies, to make sure that we're all working towards the same goal. We're not competing with each other for opportunities like funding or delivering projects in certain areas. And then one other thing that I'm really keen on, and I think is an increasingly important area of work for coastal adaptation, is the use of dredged material. So every year in the UK, we pull millions of tons of sediment, shingle, gravel out of our estuaries and our ports. And that's done by industry and by port authorities. And often, because it's easy, it gets dumped out to sea. But there's a use for that material, and a really, really great use. And so we're increasingly working with these port authorities and industry partners to put these materials where it can be of use. And so, for example, soft estuary sediment you might apply at the top of the salt marsh to recharge it, to raise the level and counter erosion. Or if you have access to harder, gravelier sediments, those can be used to build up nesting islands for plover or terns. Or actually for creating naturalized banks in estuaries to just protect softer habitats from that wave action and that erosion. And then the final thing that we do, which we're starting to do more of, is carrying out targeted research to better understand the habitats, the way that the water works, and the species that live there and how they behave. For example, last year we carried out a large bar-tailed godwit tracking program, which I have a fantastic anecdote for you if we have time.
Go on, go for it.
Okay, I'd like to tell you the story of Clive. And Clive is one of the bar-tailed godwits that was tagged on the Wash last year, autumn 2023. And the idea is to understand, okay, how are they migrating? Where are they stopping? What are the patterns and the behaviors? And in a 3.5-day period, we saw some amazing behavior from Clive. Clive took off from the Wash, flew kind of across the UK into the Irish Sea, hang around Birmingham and Ireland for a few hours, probably feeding and recharging, getting ready for hitting the East Atlantic and heading south, which he did. He headed towards the Bay of Biscay. And as he was approaching Southern Europe, getting on way to Africa, he encountered a large storm formation, hit land. Clive hit land, clearly had a think, turned around again and came straight back to the Thames estuary and back to the Wash. And this was fantastic because it shows us that birds are adaptive, well, bar-tailed godwits at least, are adaptive and responsive to changing environmental factors. And actually, migration is not an on-off switch. It can be impacted by so many things. And that's really useful for us to know.
Fascinating. We will be coming back to tracking and tagging in a future session, so do come back for that one, everyone, because it's a really interesting subject about how we discover where birds are going, and then that leads us to be able to take steps to protect the areas that they need. Really interested in what you're saying about using the spoil, the sediment, because that reminds me of the project in I believe it comes under the East Coast Wetlands, but Wallasey Island, which used the spoil from, or the material from digging out Crossrail under London. And these are such marvelous ideas, working together in partnership, or recycling, isn't it? It's about recycling.
Absolutely. Why dump it out to sea when actually you can recycle it, put it onto habitats and make them more resilient for the future? You're absolutely right. I should have mentioned Wallasey Island. That was truly groundbreaking in not just the technique that we use and the partnership we use to deliver it, but the sheer scale.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, these things have to be done on landscape scale. So just wanted to mention World Heritage recognition. So I understand that all these important sites together are bidding for some major international recognition. Can you tell us a bit about it and where we are at with that application?
Absolutely. So we all know about UNESCO World Heritage sites. It's not specifically necessarily for natural heritage. That's a subcategory that we are bidding for. And the area that I described, the Humber to the Thames, is the landscape that the RSPB has led in putting forward as a potential site to be inscribed with World Heritage status by UNESCO. It's about 170,000 hectares of this nearly continuous coastline of protected sites and really important wildlife areas. And last year, at the start of last year, the UK government accepted the East Coast wetlands onto their tentative list of sites, so sites that they're proposing. Later in the year, 2023, it was accepted by UNESCO onto their tentative list. So that's really exciting. That means that we're well on the way and it's not just a pipe dream anymore. Where we are now is really kind of crucial. We acknowledge the RSPB can't lead this thing single-handedly. We do have partners in local authorities and the WWT, but to really take it forward, there's a lot of work to be done in firming up that partnership, bringing everyone involved on board. That's the 6 counties, the 28 local authorities, innumerable community interest groups and coastal forums. Everyone needs a seat at the table, and formulating that and getting that into a format where it's going to have longevity is a serious piece of work. So we're working on that now with consultants. But the time frame is that even when and if we are successful, it will be the end of the decade that we actually achieve full inscription as a World Heritage Site. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. And the one other thing I'd say about this is I want to be really clear about why this is so exciting and why it isn't. What does it not do? It's World Heritage status does not create specifically any further legal protection. These sites won't be more protected from a legal point of view. The power is in the culture and the enthusiasm. The reason that we are so interested and so enthused about achieving World Heritage status is there was no tool like it for galvanizing motivation and awareness of the importance of this landscape on an international scale. We have partners across the channel in the North Sea in the woodlands, which is another World Heritage Site inscribed for the very, very similar reasons that we're going for. And that's the largest mudflat habitat area in the world, going down the Dutch, German and Belgian coasts, and Danish, of course. So we see other partners achieving the same inscription for the same reasons, and the power that it's had for them, and that's why it's so important.
Thank you. Finally, and we've touched on this a few times, the English East Coast wetlands don't just matter for us in the UK, do they? They are of international significance.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the theme here is migration, and we can't talk about flyways on a national context. We sit at quite a key place on the East Atlantic Flyway, running from the Arctic down to Africa, in that we're a fantastic staging post, along with our colleagues on the continent, for birds that are refueling and resting up. But conservation for a flyway can't happen in a local scale, or at least it can, but the effectiveness will be massively reduced. If we want to be kind of successful with conservation for migratory birds, we really need to communicate and join up with our partners up and down the flyway, which we do, especially with our partners within BirdLife. But if you look at species, I know these aren't wetland species, but let's say the turtle dove or nightingale, we do a lot of conservation work for them in the UK. But that only goes so far without complementary conservation work elsewhere along their migratory routes. So it's really important to work together.
And we'll be hearing more about the amazing migration route that is the East Atlantic Flyway in next week's webinar. So do join us for that. Milo, thank you so much. And we'll bring you back in at the end for questions and answers.
Thanks, Jamie.
Now, it's time for a weather forecast. And by weather forecast, I mean Luke Phillips with his special weather forecaster jacket. I hope he's got it on. Yeah, where's your jacket, Luke?
Oh, hang on.
Yeah, you can't do it. You can't do it unless you've got your jacket on. It won't work.
No, jacket.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to find out what we're likely to see, I think, over the next week or so. Over to you, Luke.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Jamie. So every week I sort of pick out a few species that I think are ones to look out for this week, make a few predictions, make some wacky predictions. This first bit might confuse some people though, because wheatear is actually one of the first sort of migrants that tend to show up in terms of our traditional sort of spring migrant birds. But the reason I wanted to pick this out this week in particular is because although if you go into the uplands, Lundy Island actually could place seaweeders, but particularly the uplands, you'll see them breeding, they'll be on their territories, some probably even nest building by now, I'm sure. But if you see one in a slightly more unusual location, like sort of the coast, maybe on a beach or a headland somewhere, or some sort of random bit of sort of open land in the middle of nowhere, the birds you're seeing this time of year are actually heading, well, way further north than the UK. So these birds tend to go to Greenland. So if you've seen kind of a wheatear slightly out of its context in its breeding habitat at this time of year, they tend to look a bit bigger. They're a little bit brighter, but they've got the most incredible journey. If you think where Greenland is, that's quite a long way from West Africa, where these birds set off on their migration from. So it's a remarkable thing, and there's actually evidence to suggest that some birds, they migrate north from West Africa, they get to Spain, and then they do a single flight all the way from northern Spain to Greenland, which is incredible. It's one of the longest single flights of any passerine that migrates. So yeah, pretty remarkable bird. So yeah, look out for your Greenland wheatears this week. But on to something that you might expect me to pick up on this week. We've got the swift. Now, if you were here last week, we had a fantastic whole webinar all about swifts, and I did mention them last week because how could I not? It was a webinar about swifts. But this next week is really the week to be looking out for your first swift. I bet a few people may have seen them already. I know a few of my friends have. I haven't, and I've literally got my binoculars next to my desk because I've got a window here, and yeah, no swifts for me yet. But in the next week, I'm not going to guarantee anything, but it's a very, very good chance of seeing a swift. So yeah, eyes to the sky, everybody. This next one is, again, a bird you might expect me to mention this time of year. But this next week, I would say, is a good week to be listening out for your first cuckoo. We've heard, I think Jos was mentioning cuckoos earlier on and the different habitats you can see them in, so the uplands, woodlands, and reed beds in particular. But yeah, this next week, I bet you'll get a cuckoo. They do cuckoo on their migration as well. They do call. So, you know, if you hear a cuckoo in a rather unusual place, and last spring, this is a weird thing. Forgot about this until literally just now. I was in my garden having a barbecue and looked up the garden, and there was actually a cuckoo in my veg patch eating caterpillars, which was it was actually in the autumn rather than the spring. But yeah, just remembered that. So that's a nice thing to think about. So you've got the male cuckoo, as you can see in this picture. Also listen out for the female cuckoo. They make this remarkable bubbling sound. So if you get a chance later, go off and have a listen to that. But yeah, this week, hopefully, if you're out and about, listen out for your first cuckoo. Now on to the next one, which is a bit of a curveball, really. And I thought I'd mention this because there's a really unusual scenario that you could face at this time of year. So there's quite a few sort of wintering birds that are still around, or they're just kind of migrating back to their breeding grounds. And, you know, cast your minds back to the middle of winter. We had that waxwing winter, a waxwing eruption. There were thousands in the UK this winter. Hopefully lots of you got to see some of them. I saw a few in the Midlands. I saw a flock of 30, really cool. But there's still some in the country now. And even this morning, there's been several flocks seen on the east coast and up north. So these are birds that are migrating back to Scandinavia. So these are the very last waxwings from the invasion heading off back to Scandinavia. But it's a really weird thing to imagine, seeing a wheatear against, maybe a swift flying over a wheatear. It's one of those great things about migration. You see some of the most random species, next, side by side. It's absolutely wonderful. Now on to the next species. And I'm going to just use this species as a kind of flag for something that lots of bird watchers like to do at this time of year, and that's sea watching. Or more technically, watching birds out to sea. So if you're anywhere near the coast over the next few weeks, take the binoculars, take a telescope if you have one, and just spend a little bit of time just staring out to sea, because you'll notice things drifting by. So this one is a Pomerine skua. This is a favourite of loads of bird watchers around the country. It's kind of one of the best birds to see whilst you're doing a sea watch. Got the fantastic long tail, and that is sort of extended central tail feathers is spoon shaped. So yeah, bird watchers get very excited about the old spoons on the pom skuas. But yeah, this next week is a great week to do a bit of sea watching. The winds are a bit unusual. I've got blasting southerlies today down on the south coast. I'm in Dorset, and there's genuinely been a few Pomerine skuas seen off the Dorset coast this morning. So the wind's pushing them a little bit closer to shore. Later this week, the winds look quite easterly. Looks like there's a real blast from the east, actually. So if you're on the east coast and northeast coasts, that might blow some pom skuas a little bit closer to the shore. But do look out for things like Arctic skua, great skua, terns as well, common tern, Arctic tern. Their migration's in full flow right now, and there's been lots of talk of waders. They're all moving up to the Arctic, and that happens actually over the next few weeks, because in the Arctic it's still a bit cold up there, so birds breed a little bit later, so they head back a little bit later. So but yeah, sea watching, and that's a great thing to do at this time of year. That's the last species I was going to mention on the slides, except I didn't get a picture of the next one that I want to mention, and I like to make some sort of wacky, sort of ambitious. It probably won't come true. Last week I mentioned black-winged stilts. I think a few did turn up, but actually there was nowhere near any sort of influx. So I was talking complete nonsense last week. But given those blasting easterlies and where they're originating from, I'm going to speculate in the next week there's going to be a collared flycatcher in the UK. I'm going to go for collared flycatcher.
Where are they from, Luke? Where would that be trying to get to?
Way over in the east, way over in Eastern Europe. So nowhere near the UK, but it's something. I don't know. I was just looking at the winds and I was thinking of what could turn up in the next week. Yeah, and I thought collared flycatcher. But we see there was lots of talk of pied flycatchers in the over the webinar, so I thought, you know, collared flycatcher is quite a nice one. They're like a pied flycatcher, but with a full white collar. But yeah, I mean, if one shows up, there's going to be a lot of people heading off to see that, I'd imagine. So
let's wait and see. So look forward to your report next week. Thank you so much, Luke. Absolutely fascinating as always. Let's see what turns up over the next week or so with those easterlies. I'm going to welcome everyone back to the stage now because we have a few questions to answer. And do send your questions into us using the Q&A box. We've got time to answer a few. I'm going to start having a look through. There were a couple about Lundy actually, so I think we'll go to Lundy first. Paul, Fiona has asked what sort of conservation work was done on Lundy to help those numbers of birds grow. But we've also had a question or two from Diana, who's asking about tree cover on Lundy, and does that need to increase? Would that help with the conservation there?
Yeah, so one of the biggest threats to biodiversity globally is invasive non-native species. So there's a whole range of species that have gone extinct, and generally speaking, this happens on islands. So, and it's no different to the UK where we've got some really vulnerable species. So things like Manx shearwater, storm petrel and puffin are all highly vulnerable, and in particular to things like rats, which have appeared off the back of shipwrecks or inadvertently been introduced. So there was some really careful bit of conservation work carried out around 2000, and after a couple of years, the island was declared rat-free. And the response to the seabirds has been absolutely amazing. And the birds are really telling us that we did the right thing. I mean, they've been able to breed successfully and haven't lost their eggs, and even some of the adults are surviving now. So yeah, and following on from that, we're doing lots of biosecurity work. And this basically means we want to make sure that some of these invasive species don't get onto the islands and everyone can play their role. So, you know, from checking your bags to make sure you're not transporting anything across. Yeah, it's a really big thing, and keeping those islands pristine, that's a major part of that work. So yeah, that's what we're doing, and that's how we're working in partnership and collaboration with all the site managers. And moving on to tree cover. Yeah. So interestingly, another invasive non-native species that did cover Lundy was the rhododendron, which was discussed earlier about in the rainforest discussion you had. And yes, large areas of tree cover were cleared, which were rhododendrons, which are not particularly good for our native birds anyway. And so what it has left is a couple of pockets of woodland. And I know that on Lundy, they have been managing those pockets of woodland to make sure they've got a nice mixture of understory, midstory and canopy. But really, if you look at why the islands are special and what they support, I mean, it's the 4th largest colony now of Manx shearwater in the UK. And we support like 89% of the world population. So these are, you know, we're trying to focus on the things that are really important. And yes, making sure migrants can stop and gain food will be an issue on the islands. And I know that Landmark are doing their bit to sort of grow those little pockets here and there. But yeah, it's not necessarily a focus of our work, but clearly, yeah, there's a bit of work going on for that.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to welcome as well Guy Anderson, who's the Migratory Recovery Programme Manager for Global Species Recovery. He was here last week for the Swift session, and he's popped in to join us for our Q&As. I'm going to give you a question, Guy, so that Paul can have a break. So Sarah has asked, what's the best time to visit islands for seabirds? Not just London, but all over the UK. Is it now?
Hi, Jamie, and good afternoon, everyone. Now and onwards for the next couple of months are a pretty good time. So our first seabirds start to arrive at their breeding colonies, well, as early as March, really. But from April and especially into May and June, that's peak seabird, that's peak activity on our seabird islands, and not just islands, some of our mainland colonies as well. Visiting a really good seabird colony is something I always try and do every year because it's just such a fantastic spectacle, whether it's on an island or on the mainland. And we're blessed with some of the best and most accessible seabird colonies in the world to go and marvel at. So yeah, make an opportunity, go and visit a nearest seabird colony to you because they're just fabulous.
We can't heartily recommend those this season. We've got a question. I think I'm going to give this one to John. So this is about pied flycatchers. So this person says, I saw a pied flycatcher at Wood of Cree in Scotland last week. Beautiful. Are they quite shy? Are they quite hard to see?
They're not really, Jamie. They're quite quite a visible bird in the woodlands. You know, it's I watched a nest box last summer at Gwenfryd Dinas. Nest box about 3 meters off a boardwalk, and day after day there were numerous telephoto lenses within a couple of meters of the box, and they had chicks. The chicks fledged. You know, they do really well. They seem to cope quite well, and yeah, very visible, very photogenic bird. So my Facebook feed is swamped with images of pied flycatchers at the moment.
I'm not surprised. They are stunning. I'm just having a look through what else we've got. Another one for you, John, actually. So Rachel says, could you please mention again what the areas that you cover and the locations of the temporary, hopefully not temporary, temperate rainforest? I'm assuming Rachel would like to go and visit some of these wonderful places.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sites that I'm involved with myself. So we've got Cwm Clydach, which is just north of Swansea, which is a kind of woodland site, but there's a river as well, so lots of dipper and things down there too. So it's a kind of nice site. Gwenfryd Dinas is one of the best spots in Wales as far as I'm concerned. Full suite of migrant species, pied flycatchers everywhere. Really accessible, really remote, quite a different feel than other parts of Wales. And then Carngafalt and the Elam Valley. Carngafalt's a kind of woodland reserve. There's a nice visitor centre, so you can get coffee and things too. And you've got uplands and the woodland habitats, upland hay meadows, so really interesting suite of species. And then the Mawddach estuary on the edge of Snowdonia. So we've got a number of woodland sites there. Coed Garth Gell in particular is a fantastic site, really accessible. You'll see some lovely Highland cattle up there as well, which have been grazing the woodlands the last couple of years. And yeah, the usual migrant species. The odd nightjar as well, actually, on the heathland at the top of the reserve. So yeah. But there's, west coast of Scotland, North Devon coast, there are pockets of woodland around, and they'll all be pretty good at this time of year.
So everyone's got lots of places to go and visit. It just sounds this is the perfect time to get out and see some of this stuff. Neil's written a message to say he has got 2 whimbrel on the coast by him at the moment, so sees them every evening. Beautiful birds. That's another delight for this time of year. Okay, I think we're running out of time, so I just wanted to sum up really. Get out there, go and see these birds as they arrive, or move through, or linger for a little bit. Hopefully, might just get a chance to see a few more waxwings, as Luke's mentioned. Volunteer on a reserve. We're going to we'll put a link in the chat as well. And the next 2 webinars coming up, we're going to be looking next week at the entire flyway. So we will be following the journey all the way down from Iceland, all the way down to South Africa, and looking at those kind of hotspots en route. And then the week after that, we'll be touching on some more highlights of birds that make incredible journeys. So lots to look forward to. Save up your questions. Send us your questions in for next time. I'd like to thank all the speakers and the events team who've worked incredibly hard before, after, and during behind the scenes to pull these events together. We're going to pop a survey on your screen just as you go. Do let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your feedback, and hopefully see you next week. We did record today's session. As I said, we will hope to get that up on YouTube in about a week's time. Thank you all very much for joining us. And yeah, we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.